Hello and a warm welcome to Nobel Calling 2021 and this conversation on biomimicry, hosted by the Swedish Research Council and the Nobel Prize Museum. And my name is Anders Björs. I'm honored to be the moderator of this conversation this afternoon. And this Monday is a special Monday. It's the start of the Nobel Week. And it's a week when the importance of science, research, peace is on our minds, and Stockholm is the place to be. This is where it happens, and this afternoon is probably the most interesting topic of today, of course, because we're going to merge nature and innovations. And this conversation is live streamed from Stockholm, but it's also recorded, of course, and soon available on the Research Council's YouTube channel and the Nobel Calling web page. And for you viewers, welcome here and now. Please join the conversation and ask questions using the YouTube chat. And remind you that you have to log in to use the chat. Simple enough. And also, if you want to highlight something in this conversation on social media, on Twitter, for example, please tag the Nobel Prize Museum at Nobel Prize Museum and at Vetenskapsrådet. Together with hashtag, of course, hashtag Nobel Calling. You can also use the hashtag Nobel Calling 2021 or Nobel Calling Stockholm. Lots of options, and everything is just as fun because we want you to join in this conversation. And let's dive into this exciting topic. This is what we're waiting for, and the Nobel Calling conversation on biomimicry. Probably you're thinking, what is that? And we are going to discover that together within this hour, ending at 4 o'clock. And this is about how we can learn from nature, not only using nature as a resource, but actually learn from nature. And who can better explain and guide us on this exciting exploration is two researchers who are joining us today. And I say welcome to, here in the studio, Johannes Messinger. You are professor of molecular biomimetics at Uppsala University at the Department of Chemistry at the Ångström Laboratory. Welcome, Johannes.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And connected from France, at the coast of the south of France, we have Fredrik Moberg, PhD in biology, director of Alba Eco, and also you have a new book out, quite recent, Den uppfinningsrika planeten. There's no title in English yet, Fredrik.
No, not really. I've been thinking about the innovative planet or the ingenious planet or something along these lines, but it hasn't been decided yet. So
right, we're gonna wait and see. But you're very much welcome joining us here in the studio in Stockholm. It's great to have you here. Can you just tell us a little bit about your backgrounds in the research areas, Johannes?
Yeah, my research is concerned with photosynthesis and how to apply photosynthesis in renewable energy context. So I study mostly the water oxidation mechanism, how plants produce oxygen from water and also cyanobacteria, and then try to learn how the principles that nature uses, how that can be applied.
How long have you been doing this research now?
Oh, I think I started about 35 years ago.
Ah.
But this on the natural system. Applying it is a bit more recent. It's about 20 years.
Still a lot of secrets to unlock from Mother Nature.
We are getting there, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting there to that as well during the conversation. And Fredrik, what about you? How do you present yourself?
I mean, I have a background as a marine biologist, so I did a PhD on coral reef ecology. Coral reefs are extremely interesting, both from a biomimicry perspective that we will talk about today, but also interesting because they supply many other benefits to humankind, of course. And being a systems ecologist, doing a PhD in natural resources management, I have also broadened into other fields. So now I'm sort of doing work on biodiversity, sustainability science, etc. And I'm both active at Albaeco, as you mentioned, but also at Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University, which is a multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary center for sustainability science. So I'm dividing my time between those two organizations.
Just a curious question. How's Sweden when it comes to biomimicry? Are we a hotspot for research and interest regarding biomimicry?
Johannes,
what do you say, Fredrik?
Okay.
I think we are certainly one of the places where this is performed at a high level, but there are many other spots.
Okay.
Luckily also, because it needs many minds and many researchers to bring that forward.
Different perspectives.
Yeah.
And what is your take, Fredrik?
I mean, from an international perspective, there's definitely other places that have been more active, and in a Nordic context, Sweden is one of the sort of countries with the most activity, according to a report that was done a few years ago on the biomimicry in the Nordic countries, which was a report from the Nordic Council. So, yeah.
So, Johannes, let's unbox biomimicry.
Yeah.
But you are active in the field of biomimetics.
Yeah.
How do you explain the difference?
There actually is no big difference.
Right.
I think it's basically you can use either term. It means the same thing. In all cases, you want to study the natural process and unlock the secrets, and then try to apply that in the energy context, renewable energy context.
So if someone asks you how to explain biomimicry, how do you explain it?
Almost as I just said. I mean, essentially, we use all tools we have to study a mechanism. So we are doing molecular biomimetics. So we really want to study how an enzyme works at the molecular level. And so we study that in very great detail and then hope to understand how nature can, for example, activate metals like manganese or iron that are very abundant. How nature manages to use those to perform catalysis. Chemists need rare and expensive metals for like platinum, ruthenium, or rhodium. So we really want to learn that because that will make a big impact on the energy field.
Interesting. And Fredrik, you have written a whole book that is an example in a way of biomimicry. But what is your favorite example, if you have to explain it?
I mean, just to start with just sort of the word in itself, of course, bios is life, and mimesis is from Old Greek, and it's sort of to imitate or emulate the best ideas from nature. And to me, there's often, I mean, now you can use the words sort of and the concepts interchangeably, but there is often a difference because architects, city planners, ecologists often use biomimicry. And if you're more into molecular biology, engineering, and smart materials, you often hear biomimetics. But the difference is not that important any longer. But I often use biomimicry because there has been a tradition to emphasize that the smart solutions you come up with shall also be sustainable from an environmental perspective or more climate smart, etc. So, but now I guess more or less everybody is into that, so it's not that important any longer.
Yeah.
But of course, I really like, there are some iconic examples of biomimicry that you often hear about. So one of them is how you can use the kind of ventilation that termites have in their nests instead of using air condition in a big building, for instance, where you often use fossil fuels to get the energy to that air condition. So building a huge, even skyscrapers, with this kind of technique that is imitating how termites build their nests, you can have a passive cooling of a big building and only use like 1/10 or 10% of the energy that would be needed for a building that use conventional air conditioning. So that is one cool example that you often hear about. That is definitely also sustainable or more sustainable, more climate smart.
Yeah. And the most common one is Velcro, that everyone has heard about.
And that's also an example where because Velcro is produced by fossil materials like polyester and nylon. So it is a smart solution, but it is not necessarily sustainable from an environmental perspective. So, but now you often see recycled Velcro as well. So inspired by the bird dogs.
Inspired by nature. There was a conversation recently on a popular place called Clubhouse about there is a biomimicry club if someone is interested. And the topic was how to understand biomimicry. And what came back was to use your childlike mind to kind of rediscover nature. Is that what we need to do, to view nature in another way than we were used to?
I don't know.
What do you say? Do we need to rediscover nature in a way?
I would agree with that, but in many cases, like photosynthesis, we know that there is a secret that we want to discover, and there I think a childlike viewpoint doesn't help really.
Right.
There you need to work very hard with scientific tools to come to a conclusion. But if you want to discover new things, that are hidden in nature, that you could apply, I think there it could help a lot, that approach.
What do you say, Fredrik? Using your childlike mind to discover biomimicry and the potentials?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of curiosity that also can bring a new angle to discussions between different disciplines. So in that sense, I think it's that sort of, if you want to call it childlike curiosity, could be good, and it could be a way to rediscover and reconnect. We often talk about reconnecting to the biosphere, reconnect to nature.
Yeah.
We need to do that in our modern societies. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out in the forest every day, but instead of just learning sort of about nature and different species, etc., we want to learn what they do and how they solve their challenges, because they have been around for 3.8 billion years, and they have apparently been able to survive on this planet by being energy smart, sort of managing natural resources in a good way. So from that perspective, we can definitely sort of emulate some of nature's best ideas also to solve our modern challenges. So, and I heard about a sort of study looking into kids in the USA, and they often know about up to several hundreds logotypes of different companies, but only a handful of plant and animal species. So maybe we need to change that, and not only sort of that kind of curiosity can we find solutions to our modern day problems, and cool technologies could be a way for kids to discover nature in another way than we normally do. So
that's interesting.
Biomimicry is an interesting angle on this topic. Yeah.
But once you got the concept of biomimicry, do you ever view nature the same way, Johannes?
I think I can still appreciate it in a normal way.
Yeah.
The fall colors we just had,
yes, of course.
and so forth. I think I can do that, but and I do that normally. But I think I also enjoy thinking. If I see a leaf, think into the leaf and the different layers, and zoom down in my mind to photosystem 2 and the water splitting complex, and see that in front of me. So I think it's both, and it's good to be able to switch, I think.
Yeah. But watching nature, viewing nature as a resource compared to intelligence in a way.
Yeah, I think it's important that we as you say, view it as a resource and not only for ideas and not only a resource for materials, that we don't cut it down all the time, but that we can learn from nature. I think that's a very important switch in viewing it.
Yeah, what do you say, Fredrik? Do you view the coral reefs differently when applying biomimicry, the concept to that?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And also, as Johannes mentioned, from a resource perspective, I mean, we have overutilized many resources and exploited them too much in an unsustainable way. But we can also just learn from nature instead of how we can utilize our own resources in a smart way. So you definitely think in new ways of nature when you have a biomimicry lens on it. So I fully agree. But it's also really important, that's also the same, we as biologists, when you learn a lot about species and details, you still want to be able to just enjoy nature, the way you always mentioned.
The power of nature, the beauty of nature, of course.
Yeah, totally.
But Fredrik, how do you see the connections between biomimicry and sustainability? Because this is an important connection, like we've been touching on right now, not only using nature as a resource over and over again in a way, but how can how does biomimicry kind of merge into sustainability?
I mean, for instance, we have the 17 global goals for sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals. That was it's kind of the most important to-do list of humanity today. And basically all countries have signed it, and we work with it during the Agenda 2030. And it's everything from minimizing poverty and hunger, and also the more environmentally focused sustainable development goals, of course. So and in the book, I had some fun trying to link all 17 sustainable development goals to different biomimicry solutions. It was definitely possible. Some of them might have been a bit far-fetched, but it was a fun exercise. And I even have like a website where I encourage people to post their best biomimicry examples and link it to the different sustainable development goals that it might contribute to. But if we just zoom out and do the most sort of common interpretation of this, is that what we do when we produce things in conventional industries is often to do some heat, beat, and treat. We heat things up, we put it under a lot of pressure, and we treat it with a number of chemicals. We take, we make, and we waste. And we use energy and material from the whole planet, basically. And compared to this, nature often do other things. It can produce things in body temperature. It doesn't have to increase the pressure, and doesn't treat it with a lot of chemicals. And it does all chemical reactions basically in water. And in nature, there's seldom any waste, because all waste turns into a resource for another organism. And this you can definitely see in the coral reefs. So there are so many things when it comes to being climate smart and being resource efficient that we can learn from nature. But as a moral compass, it's not often, it can be really bad, of course. So we shouldn't mimic everything. And just because we mimic nature, it doesn't automatically turn into sustainable solutions. We need to be wise when we do biomimicry. Of course.
That's easy to think. Just act like nature and everything will be fine.
No. There's so much cruelty in nature and so much competition. And so we should definitely not mimic everything we see.
Because there's other ways we can do it. Johannes, you are in the research area about artificial photosynthesis, among else, I guess. Yes, but from sunlight to fuels, valuable products for a sustainable future. You wrote this in 2018. Tell us, how do you see biomimicry adapted to like energy systems, sustainability?
Yeah, I think we need to look at the broader picture here. So photosynthesis is basically harvesting the solar light and converts it into chemicals and to chemical energy. And by that, it sustains all life on Earth. And we have to learn from that because the sun is really the biggest energy source also that we can use for the energy system. And people have realized that, and now these days we have lots of solar cells, and it's increasing, and that's very good. But that's producing electricity. And if you think about the whole energy system worldwide, it's about only 20% of the energy carrier is electricity, 80% is fuels. So solar energy stored in chemicals. And in Sweden that's slightly different. We have 40% electricity and 6% fuels. And it will turn a bit more, but I'm absolutely convinced that we do need solar fuels. That means fuels made from solar light, water, CO2, maybe nitrogen, that in a photosynthetic way. That means synthesized with the energy of solar light.
So, I mean, this is one of the great challenges for humanity, how we are, what kind of energy we're using and how it's created. But when you say solar fuels in a traditional way, what do you mean?
I mean, solar fuels for us are fuels that are made from sunlight, water, and possibly CO2 or nitrogen. And this could be, for example, hydrogen, green hydrogen. It could be some carbon compounds that are made. It could be ammonia, which also actually is a very good fuel. It's not so much realized yet, but it's an excellent way to store hydrogen or nitrogen, bound to nitrogen, because then you can compress it at very low pressures, at room temperature, store it for a long time, and then utilize it later. And I think this is so important to have fuels to make an energy system resilient, because solar light comes and goes. We know that it's very strong seasonal variation.
Yeah.
We're now going into the dark season in Sweden again.
Yes.
So very little, but so somehow you need to save the sun that we have during summer to the winter time. And so there we need fuels, because storing so much electricity is a huge challenge. I don't think it will be possible.
And also it takes a lot of resources, again,
Also,
from nature to create batteries and so on.
Exactly.
Big discussion, have a lot of impact.
So I think we
in
need
different
both
ways.
electricity and fuels for
How far are we? I mean, you've been doing research for decades now. How far are we to have applied these possibilities with solar fuels? I mean, in a kind of an impact for society that is positive.
Yeah, I mean, we have already electrolyzers that you can couple to solar cells, and that way you can make hydrogen in a green hydrogen. But those electrolyzers mostly still use rare elements, and we want to replace that. And we also want to work towards a more direct system. We don't need to produce electricity first, but make it all in one unit. So that's what artificial photosynthesis is about, to kind of try to get to wireless devices.
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge drive right now for solar cells. It's subsidized, and it's kind of starts to be a commodity in a way, or we want it to be a commodity, creating electricity that way. Do you see, how do you view solar fuels in that sense, that it becomes a commodity? Is it for households, or is it for societies? How do you view it?
I think it has the potential to be used at all scales, from the household to big factories, or putting a huge factory into the Sahara or something like that. Yeah. So I think it can be applied at all scales, and because it's, as Fredrik also said, it will be at room temperature at normal pressure once it's realized. But we are still on the way. It's no commodity yet. No, we are lagging behind electricity.
And this is where it gets interesting, when research gets applied to practical solutions.
Yeah.
But
they are lab scale devices. I mean, those
lab scale devices
also exist. Yes.
So here's the question: do you think before you are ending your career as professor, will you see the devices or the practical applications for solar fuels that you're doing research on?
I think there's a chance. I mean, that's about 10 years to go. So I think there's a chance. I cannot say for sure.
No,
but there's a big drive all over the world in that direction. So I do strongly hope that, yes.
Interesting. 10 years. Seems a long time, but I mean, we are in the... Yes, exactly. Just like time right now. And by the way, if you're watching this, please log on and use the chat for the YouTube as well, the YouTube chat, and ask questions. There's a possibility to do that. So we're talking about solutions based on biomimicry, solar fuels, and the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. But what do you say, Fredrik? Is there areas like food and climate, of course, but are there other areas that touches on biomimicry that you haven't thought of right now that ties into sustainability?
Definitely. Can you still hear me? Well,
yes. Yep.
Good. I mean, I also just want to add one thing, because there has been some biomimicry applications also to make solar cells more efficient. For instance, by sort of mimicking the wings of black butterflies on a microscale, because they are extremely black, because they soak up a lot of the solar energy and doesn't reflect it back into space. So mimicking that pattern on solar cells has been tried, and also mimicking polar bears' fur and their sort of hair in their fur has also been tried. So there's biomimicry in other aspects of solar energy as well. That's quite interesting, I think. I don't know, do you have any collaborations with people doing that kind of research as well, Johannes?
No, I don't. Yeah. So I'm not working so much on the solar cell level, but more on the catalyst level. So.
Yeah, of course. So that's also interesting, with different researchers doing their different parts in a long chain that could then result in something really good from an energy perspective.
Yeah, but we do that research in a big context. So we have the Center of Artificial Photosynthesis, and there we have all aspects combined.
Yeah. And going back to your question, Anders, I mean, also in the book, I did like different chapters on different aspects of biomimicry. So it was everything from smart materials to, I mean, renewable energy to renewable food, for instance. And I mean, and also more sustainable cities and architecture, and even how whole economies and the transport sector can gain from doing some biomimicry. So there's definitely many different things you can do with a biomimicry angle on this.
And now it comes to mind when you mention how solar cells can be more effective, or using mimicking the fur of polar bears. That sounds like embedded biomimicry in a way, that it's part of another structure, and part of that, not only a whole structure that is based on biomimicry, but biomimicry becomes part of everything.
Yeah, definitely.
What about, I mean, here's another question. We talk about nature, but we also know that biodiversity is threatened day by day on a daily basis. And if you read up on the sixth extinction and the concept that we're in a path that is crucial for nature to be sustained, what about the biodiversity? Does that have a role for biomimicry? If there's less nature to mimic, how do you view that? Fredrik?
I mean, biodiversity is extremely important from so many different perspectives, and we kind of forget that because we are in a dual crisis when it comes to climate and ecosystems and biodiversity loss. And I don't think people have fully understood how severe the situation can be that when these two crises are combined. And we need biodiversity because it does many things for us humans, and we also need it because there are sort of moral and ethical reasons to conserve it, of course. But we have been, and I have been working with the concept of ecosystem services, and there are all the benefits we gain from biodiversity. And if you have more species in an ecosystem, it can also be more resilient, and you can have a backup plan, and you don't put all your egg in the same basket if you have many different species performing a particular function like photosynthesis in an ecological system, and then the system will be less vulnerable if you lose one species, for instance. So that's one aspect of it. But also, of course, from a biomimicry perspective, there are species that we haven't even sort of described yet. Some we haven't even put a name on, and we have definitely not understood what they do. And if we haven't even done that before they go extinct, there's huge resources that are vanishing, basically. And for instance, in the Amazon rainforest, there are many sort of attempts now to go more into biomimicry than just overutilizing the resources there for timber, for soybean production and meat production, etc. There's a big project led by Carlos Nobre, who is a famous Amazon rainforest and climate researcher, that they call the Amazonia 4.0. And one of the aspects that they really put forward there is biomimicry and other ways of using biodiversity without overusing it.
What do you say about biodiversity and the importance of that?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important to conserve it as much as possible. I mean, for water oxidation, photosynthesis, there's only one enzyme.
Exactly.
It's always the same. But if you go to other enzymes, like for example, hydrogenases, there's a whole zoo of them in different organisms. So that hydrogenase is an enzyme that converts protons and electrons to hydrogen, and that would be the perfect complement to the water splitting part to go the whole way. And there is still a lot to learn from the biodiversity of this enzyme, and to develop an artificial catalyst, or to put even these enzymes onto electrodes and make them stable towards high oxygen. So there is still a lot to explore.
The importance of having access to nature's richness,
exactly,
ideas and intelligence.
That's important, yeah.
If we go, it's easy to think about biomimicry as part of structures, design, engineering, and the products, for example. But if we look a little bit beyond that, Fredrik, if we can biomimicry be applied to human life? lifestyles, for example. I know in your book you interviewed a professor at KI who found biomimicry as a source solutions for lifestyle diseases, for example. And you have this and reflect on this in the book. Tell us a little bit more about that. Can we learn from nature when it comes to lifestyle disease, for example? This is interesting.
Yeah, it was extremely interesting for me as well. It was not sort of my expert topic before I wrote the book, but I met this professor Peter Stenwinkel from Karolinska Institutet, and he gathered experts in bio-inspired medicine or biomimetics and medicine for a conference a couple of years ago. And it was extremely interesting to learn more about all the scientists that met in Stockholm and discussed how, for instance, we can learn from elephants to cure cancer, from giraffes to cure high blood pressures. And Peter Stenwinkel himself is studying kidney diseases, and he learns a lot from how hibernating bears are doing it without suffering from kidney failures when they go to sleep for 6 months in the winter. So he has been sort of, from more being a clinical researcher, he's a lot in nature and even participating in different projects together with ecologists to meet his favorite animals, the brown bear, for instance. So it was really fascinating to talk to him and all the things we can learn from nature in this respect as well. And even more, of course, interesting right now with the pandemic and so on, when we know that deforestation, climate change, etc., will raise the risk of zoonotic diseases, different viruses and other diseases that spread from animals to humans, and what we can learn from that. We can even learn from the bats how they deal with the coronaviruses that they have been dealing with for many, many thousands of years and even millions of years, how they cope with them. So the same animal that probably was involved in spreading the coronaviruses to us can also be studied from a biomimetic perspective to learn how we can cope with these diseases. And it's extremely interesting, I think.
I think this part of biomimicry and the conversation we're having right now and how to view nature in that sense that's not the common discussion about biomimicry. So this is kind of new in a way, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, I mean, we often work in offices and we sit too much, we humans, and what can we learn from, for instance, the bears, again, that they are hibernating for 6 months and how they deal with that. And also just getting out in nature. There's evolutionary psychology is another interesting field that we actually feel better when we get out into nature. Even if you don't like to walk in the forest, your blood pressure will go down and your pulse will go down as well. And we know that people recover faster after burnouts, for instance, and depression if they go out in nature. So it's interesting from that perspective as well. And of course, most of our medicines, they come from plants and animals, etc., what we have discovered. So
comes to mind, talking about lifestyle and biomimicry and exercise and sitting, as you say, if you do yoga, you do the downwards facing dog. I mean, that's a posture. So that's kind of a mimicking nature in a way.
Okay, next time you have to learn me.
I will show you, definitely.
You have to teach me how to do that.
Yes, sorry. I'm trying to teach our dog to do it back home. But I was just going to say that nature kind of, we're part of nature in so many ways that you might not think of. In a lifestyle sense. But back to research. I don't know if there's much research going on when it comes to lifestyle and biomimicry. Maybe there is.
It's definitely happening now. Yeah. And Professor Stenwinkel and others are definitely doing more and more in that field. So.
Okay, we're going to keep track on that. But talking about research, you're both active in centers with a focus on biomimicry. Johannes, tell us a little bit about the center you're active in.
Yeah, so the center, it started as a consortium for artificial photosynthesis. I think it was founded in 1993 by my predecessor, Samuel Sturing. And there are researchers from a broad field, very interdisciplinary, but also international, work together to trying to solve how to convert solar energy into solar fuels and chemicals. And there we cover a very broad range of different research. So starting from modifying cyanobacteria, single cells, organisms that can also do photosynthesis, kind of convert them into little factories, one could say, to produce specific compounds that we like them to produce. And that can be hydrogen, it can be isoprene or some other chemicals. And by kind of modifying their metabolism, one can gear the energy towards the production of these systems. And that is getting better and better. But also we go all the way down to studying molecular mechanisms of enzymes. We study something like proton-coupled electron transfer in this, which is a very important principle of nature, how to perform these reactions efficiently. And we also build devices from synthetic catalysts that we synthesize in this consortium. So we couple them to solar cells, or we make electrodes that absorb directly the light and perform the reactions. So it's a super interesting network to work on it. We don't call it biomimicry, interestingly, coming back to what we said in the beginning, but we call it artificial photosynthesis. But it's really a part of a discipline of biomimicry.
Back in '93, when it was kind of the first launched, did you use the term biomimetics at that point, or was it applied later?
I think that the program started later. The research program I'm heading now started later. I think then it was called already artificial photosynthesis.
Okay, I believe. So the kind of the view using biomimetics was added and
no, it was already built in, but the term wasn't there, wasn't used. But it was always a combination of the biology and the chemistry and the physics and even theoretical simulations. So that's all built together, and this is so nice to talk in this environment and get inspired by the others and help when needed. So.
And Fredrik, you're involved in the Biomimicry Center. Tell us, what's the name of it? It's quite recent, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's sort of comes out of the report I mentioned for the Nordic Council when they did the mapping exercise of people who are involved in bioinspiration, biomimetics, bionics, biomimicry, etc. And one of the outcomes of that report was that the Nordic countries should collaborate more, and that first we were sort of planning on having a conference, but we wanted to have the conference in real life, and then there was a pandemic. But we have started the center together with Nordic counterparts, and it's called Nordic Biomimicry. So it's so far a small thing, more like a network, but we hope to have more activities in the future and work even more closely with our collaborators in the other Nordic countries, because there are a lot of interesting things happening in the Nordic countries in this field. So,
and you have events planned or already happening within that center, don't you?
Yeah, we have workshops and courses and also other events coming up, and we definitely hope to organize that big Nordic conference pretty soon. So, yeah.
If someone listening in on this, how can they find you?
NordicBiomimicry.org is
Okay.
It's easy to find.
And Johannes, your center is also online somehow?
Yes. You can look at solarfuel.se.
All right. Okay, good. Interesting. We will keep track on you.
But definitely we should connect also to centers.
Maybe you can collaborate.
Yeah, definitely. We should. I would love to come to your lab and see what happens there.
Most welcome.
Yeah.
Because that's part of the research, the networking to swap ideas and insights and so on, isn't it? So it's an integral part of net research, I guess.
Yeah, and for that, live meetings are actually very important.
Yeah.
You can do some on Zoom, but really more chemistry happens if you
chemistry of life
and ideas exchange much more fluently, I would say.
Yes, so it's good to move in that way, that's great. We're going to swap focus a little bit. We've been touching on this a little bit, but we spoke we've been speaking about the narrative of nature in a way, what it means for us, and about biomimicry. But can we change this narrative? I know, Fredrik, you've been touching on this as well, that nature is a resource that we're using, that's kind of a common narrative, if I may say, or something that we fight. We're fighting nature, and we're fighting back, and nature fights us, and it's a huge challenge as a human to survive in nature and so on. But can this narrative change? Does it need to change? What do you say, Fredrik?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And one of the sort of the mother of the modern biomimicry, Janine Benyus, wrote one of the most famous books on the topic back in 1997, Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature. She has one of her famous quotes is, if you see nature as a mentor instead of just a sort of supply of raw material, everything changes. Because, I mean, that has been one of our problems, to only see it as a source of resources for ourselves and our own societies. So I think that's extremely important from that point of view. And also, I think it's important now because we often talk about it as something that we're losing, like we lose biodiversity. There's a huge extinction crisis. And we see also nature as a victim to human activities. But if we can change that, and nature can sometimes be a hero instead, someone we can actually learn from, I think that can be quite important nowadays when we need some more optimistic visions as well, and not only being stuck in the crisis, so to say.
True.
So there are many different reasons for changing that narrative, I think.
How can it be changed? Who should change it? How can we help out? Or who can create that change, do you think? What do you say, Johannes?
I have no answer to that. Sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, like that we talk now, I hope that will contribute to changing that view.
Exactly.
And obviously we also have students in our environment. I think in the CAP environment, it's about 80 students or something, and postdocs. And I think they suck it up, and these ideas, and they really embrace these ideas, and will carry it forward. So I think that way.
It comes to mind, there's a concept called the poetry of innovation. If we're supposed to have innovation, or when innovation happens and we're creating something, we also need to craft the language that describes the innovation that has been kind of carried into reality. But it's not before we have created this narrative that we can actually appreciate or talk about or realize the innovation. And maybe this is something about nature as well, that we need to craft a language, how we view nature. And I know Janine Benyus, she kind of, that book kind of carried that message that changed the view. And also biomimicry as a concept, it was already realized, but she kind of put it into the mainstream. So, but you're trying to do something like that too, Fredrik, with your book, to create conversations and to bring the concept further in Sweden, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, and also getting some of these stories out in media, which is sort of important carrier of different narratives, of course, and also teaching it to kids. I think both as a way that we discussed earlier to rediscover nature and reconnect to nature, but also getting some hopes. I mean, I get that often when I talk to kids and the more young people, that even if I talk about sort of the problems like 50% of the time and solutions 50% of the time, they sort of it feels like for them that I just spoke about bad things all the time, that it's often hopeless. So I think getting it into education, for instance, and getting that power into kids as well, that they can be agents and actually learn things that can help solve some big problems. That's also an important part of that narrative, I think. Yeah, there are many different things you can do. But I mean, often we talk about the nightmare, things we want to avoid in the future, future scenarios that are really depressing. But we also need to have a vision of something. I have a dream vision as well. And hopefully biomimicry can be one small part of that puzzle that we need to build. So.
But when it comes to narrative and storytelling, the power of the sun, and power of photosynthesis.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can imagine that you can talk about that power in an interesting way, Johannes, and you're doing it already, of course. So, how do you drive the narrative for biomimicry in that sense?
In that sense, I mean, photosynthesis shows that one can utilize solar energy to produce fuels and chemicals under ambient conditions and build up the whole biosphere basically with that energy. But one also has to realize that the photosynthesis, like a tree outside, is not super efficient. I mean, it's only if you look how much solar energy is stored in biomass on an annual basis, it's 1% or even less in many cases. But there are very efficient steps in photosynthesis, and in artificial photosynthesis, we basically want to copy these very efficient steps and very efficient catalysts. And then put those together to make an overall more efficient device. And there are actually lab-scale devices that have a 20% efficiency going from solar light to hydrogen, which is amazing. But to really come to a device that can be applied on the market, they need to be cheap, they have to be efficient, and they have to be robust. They have to last for a long time, and quite frequently you can meet 2 of the criteria, but not, I think I haven't seen any that meets all 3 criteria. So there are still lots to do.
And often when we talk about energy, it's kind of this sense of it's a scarcity, it's a limited resource.
Yeah.
But thinking about photosynthesis and nature, that comes to mind is abundance.
That is right. I mean, solar light is very abundant. There's more. I think there's the saying that there's so much light solar light hitting the face of the Earth in one day as humankind uses up in 1 year. This has been calculated some years ago. Then it was true. I think now it's kind of lagging a bit behind. But still, there's a huge access. But it's also very dispersed. So one has to learn how to utilize it in a wise way. But I think we're on the way.
It sounds like you have exciting research, trying to unlock these opportunities in a way.
It's fascinating for us, at least.
Yes. We really hope that you succeed, of course.
And it is a beautiful narrative in itself. If you can have fuels in the future that are produced by solar beams, water and carbon dioxide. I mean, but are there any sort of drawbacks? I mean, the chemicals and the processes you need to use when creating the artificial photosynthesis, could it create another problem, like we were discussing with batteries, for instance, that you just ask out of curiosity here, because I don't know.
We are aiming to utilize abundant elements and non-toxic elements, and so in that way we hope to avoid these kind of backlashes. But that makes it also harder. So I mean, there are already very efficient catalysts using ruthenium, molecular catalysts, synthetic catalysts that are really on par or even better than a water splitting catalyst in photosynthesis, at least for turnover rates. But we still need to learn how to do that with abundant manganese or iron. Those complexes, they easily turn into oxides, and then they're
so we don't end up with some scarce resources needed to create the artificial photosynthesis.
No. I mean, that's part of our biomimicry approach, to also mimic nature's way to utilize abundant elements to perform these reactions. That is part of our integral part of the approach.
Sounds both promising and comforting that you're working in that way with that ambitions. And comes to mind as well that the research, I mean, this is just listening to you, it's super complex, super interesting. But you told me that you're using the fascinating and powerful installations down in southwest Sweden, Lund, the Max 4 laboratory, that makes it possible for you to do the research you're doing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're going there to study our artificial catalysts that we synthesize to kind of learn how they change during catalysis, I mean, if you take out electrons and so forth, to how they're changing, and to really understand how we need to improve them to make them more efficient and more stable. But we also go to other facilities around the world, like to the free electron laser in Stanford to study the biological systems, to learn about really step by step, because now one can take crystal structures from all the different intermediates of the water oxidation cycle and get structures of these intermediates. And on top of that, we not only have these intermediates, but also transients between these steps, redox steps in the cycle. And that really starts to unlock all the secrets there. So we are really getting close.
So the MAX4 that's an opportunity to actually watch processes unfold in real time, isn't it?
Not yet, I would say. You can study these catalysts, but you don't have that time. You can do also in situ measurements, but getting the crystal structures that I was talking about, you need a free electron laser, and that's not built yet down there.
Of course.
But it may come.
Yes.
I hope so.
Just a little promotion. We are doing a podcast on MAX4 and the ESS installations at the Research Council. That's something to listen in. So a vast difference of research going on there. So interesting.
Yeah, but maybe I can add to that the proton source. I mean, measuring proton diffraction, kind of to measure the hydrogen, being able to measure the hydrogen atoms in a system is super important, and also at the ISS, because managing the protons in a reaction, a biological reaction, is one of the keys how to kind of get down the activation energies and to make it possible to use these metals, and kind of following the hydrogen bonding networks. So I will go into that also very soon, doing neutron diffraction.
We're going to track your research closely, Johannes. This sounds exciting. What about, we already touched on this now, I think. It's funny, Fredrik, you and I, we were in a roundtable about biomimicry some 10 years ago, and we both met Janine Ben-Hughes in Stockholm at a different Nobel context. But I have to ask you, since we spoke about biomimicry 10 years ago, what has happened? We're still talking about it, but you have a new book out. But what has biomimicry gone mainstream? Has some momentum been coming for biomimicry as a concept?
No, I definitely think so. I mean, in one sense, you can sort of get the feeling that you've heard about many of these applications and ideas and innovations for a long time, but you haven't really seen them in the market so far. They haven't been mainstream in that sense. But and in another sense, you can say that many people are into biomimicry, but they might not call it biomimicry or biomimetic or so. I mean, if you're into, nowadays, you often talk about regenerative farming or regenerative business or the circular economy, etc., and cradle-to-cradle design, etc. And that is kind of biomimicry, but they don't label it biomimicry. So definitely there's a lot of things happening. And you can also look at patents, etc., an increase in that are sort of bio-inspired or biomimicry, etc. Number of books, scientific articles, etc. It's definitely increasing, but might have sort of, you might have seen a few peaks and then it starts again. So it feels like it's taking up pace again.
For good reasons.
Yeah, definitely.
And
nature is so fascinating. We should definitely go out more there and
exactly
see how it has solved its own challenges. So
we can hope that viewers are taking this concept of viewing nature to heart and practice it right away. It's very easy, isn't it? To access nature and find the magic. And Johannes, you mentioned your students. How do you think, are they viewing biomimicry in a different way than you, having worked on it for a long time? What do you say? Are they viewing this in a different way for the future and doing research? Is there a lot of talk around the fika here at Uppsala University?
I think we rarely sit down and talk about biomimicry, but maybe we should do more.
Right.
We discuss, maybe also not during the fika, but otherwise we discuss a lot the science and how to improve the different steps and how to learn and what it all means, what we measure. But I think maybe it's a good idea to bring up the topic more, biomimicry, but I do think from working in the consortium, they all embrace. I mean, no matter what aspect they work on, what I described before, they get. We have a meeting once per month, and they get exposed to all the different science. And I think they embrace this broadness and this approach. And I think many come to us because they are interested in it and have heard that we are working in that direction. So it's a very international team and from all over the world. So it's really fun to work.
Unified around the view of nature to work with the intelligence of nature.
Yes, I mean, we always look at how nature is doing it, and that's why we have groups like myself studying a lot how different enzymatic reactions take place, and then they listen to these talks and get ideas and try to do the synthetic part of it.
We're edging closer to finalizing this conversation. I think we could go on and on and on because this is a never-ending conversation, I think, a never-ending topic. We've been discovering many different aspects of biomimicry. And we don't have very many questions right now from the audience. I'm sure that this conversation will be viewed for many times also as a recording. But I know, Fredrik, that one part of your favorite topic is to, I think both of you are kind of, you're on either end in a way. Johannes, you're studying really down to the molecular, the small parts of biomimicry. And Fredrik, you're looking at the systemic thinking and how biomimicry could be impacting society and economy. And economy is interesting because that's not mentioned very often. How do you view that, biomimicry linked to economy?
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, parts of the ideas that are into the sort of circular economy thinking is, of course, in ways inspired by nature. And you can also talk about sort of how we in an economy can build insurance and resilience to different things that might happen, like stresses and shocks. And even in the banking system, sometimes ecologists and economists collaborate on that as well. So you can definitely see some parallels and some inspiration from how nature does it, even in economic systems, and how they buffer shocks and stresses, and how they could go from a linear flow from take, make, waste to more circular flows of materials, etc. So yeah, there are definitely parallels. And even also in the sort of regenerative business and regenerative leadership that has become kind of trendy right now. There are books on how you can manage organizations and whole societies and economies more like you can manage an ecosystem rather than how you can manipulate a machine. Because, I mean, in economies and in societies, there are a lot of living creatures, as humans, for instance. So maybe we can learn something from how nature navigates complexity and change in those processes as well. So that's extremely interesting. And of course, we need to do a lot of thinking ourselves. We cannot just copy nature, but there are interesting parallels, definitely.
Sounds
and even
like
the democracies. I mean, there are books on honeybee democracies, for instance, and how bees do their decision making, and you can draw parallels to how we in local societies go about when we do decision making. So that's extremely interesting. But again, we need to think ourselves as well.
It sounds to me like we have another streaming event, another conversation, another meetup about this. We have more to talk about. Just a few minutes left. Nobel Calling is, of course, part of the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Week is going on this week, and I need to ask you, of course, Johannes, you're a scientist. It's exciting times for scientists this week, knowing who gets the prizes. If you were to award a prize, the Nobel Prize that is linked to biomimicry, what would you wish for?
Well, it's a difficult question, but I think if someone would develop a water-splitting catalyst based on the principles of natural photosynthesis, I think that would be a great thing that I think could be worth a prize. But
sounds exciting. Fredrik, what do you say? What would you pick as Nobel Prize awarded in biomimicry?
interestingly, the Nobel Prize 2008 in chemistry could be seen as biomimicry. I don't want to go into detail right now, but it's learning how nature does when it's glowing in the dark, and how you can color nerve cells and different cells in different organisms that has been important for cancer research, Alzheimer research, etc. So in a sense, that was actually a prize in biomimicry. But otherwise, I think that, for instance, learning how coral reefs produce cement or concrete, because we know that concrete or cement is like 8% of the global emissions of greenhouse gases today, responsible for that. But in a coral reef, a similar thing is happening, but actually instead of releasing carbon dioxide, you can actually sequester carbon dioxide away. And there's a lot of interesting things happening in that field. And if they are really successful, that could be perhaps something that is worth a Nobel Prize in biomimicry.
It sounds like we have two great prizes forward to.
I can be in the committee together with Johannes. Let's do
That's
it.
That's great. That's a starting point.
The Nobel Prize in biomimicry.
We're going to finish off here. Before we bid you goodbye, I would like to share that we also have two podcasts coming up. As part of the Nobel Calling Conversations on the research, please check our podcast. The Swedish Research Council's podcast, För en klokare värld. It's on Spotify. Since it's 120 years this year since the Austrian immunologist Karl Landsteiner discovered that humans have different blood groups. He received a Nobel Prize in 1930 for that. We have created 2 episodes in the podcast on the theme of blood. And the first one is actually out today, focusing on telling stories about blood groups. Very exciting with this researcher Gustav Edgren at the Karolinska Institute. Thank you very, very much, Fredrik and Johannes, joining us here in the studio in various ways. Thank you for taking time and talking about biomimicry. I'm so happy that we could make it, and thank you for all the contributions to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for viewing this conversation. This is recorded as well, and look it up at the Swedish Research Council's YouTube channel and the Nobel Calling webpage. Thank you and goodbye.